point of there not being a lot of bassists at
Right.
LaGuardia at the time, there was no real formalized education program.
No bass curriculum.
No, certainly no bass guitar
Okay.
curriculum. There was still, again, this is the 80s. This is still the kind of like, you know.
Bass was not accepted as an instrument. I remember at Miami, it wasn't, Chris, right? It wasn't until like the 1980s
Right.
that it was accepted.
Well, this was also, and I'm getting into some delicate territory here,
Sure.
but this was also around the time that Wynton Marsalis was beginning to get his
The Jazz Police.
get into there was a, and
right.
Jazz at
Not-
Jazz at Lincoln Center was just, and Wynton was just beginning to make his way into education, and he would come in and do master classes and stuff. And I remember one time he had done some sort of a master class like after school. So I get to school one day and I got my little PV Fury bass, and this kid comes up to me, "Hey John, man, Wynton says that the bass guitar is not a real instrument." This is a little white kid, by the way, talking like that. And and I said, "All right, so if I swing this instrument at your head, you're not going to feel it, right? Because it's not real. If it's not real, then you won't feel it when I hit you in the head with it."
That was the prevailing attitude, and we
Right.
we used to say when the older school would say that, we say Jocko. That was our answer.
Okay. See, this was
You had Egan down there too, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that was before my
Right.
time.
Travis?
Yeah.
I was still.
Before my time.
This was I was just beginning to find it, because again I was locked in the whole '60s vibe,
Yeah.
and I was just beginning to find out about the names that were hot in New York
Right.
at that time: Will, Marcus, Mark Egan, Neil Jason, these kinds of guys, because we would hang out on 48th Street. We
Yes.
were teenagers,
Yes, yes.
and so we'd watch the Letterman Band and watch Hiram and Will and all those guys.
Yeah, sure.
Tho-
That was our
and those
role
were
models.
right, and then you'd see them on the street, like, "Oh shit, look, it's Hiram coming out of 48, coming out of Manny's," or like, "Oh look, it's like," I remember running into Leon Pendarvis
Oh.
on in Midtown or whatever. That was the cool. I'm so grateful to have been a teenager
Yeah, in that era.
in 1980s New York.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
The end of the studio, well, the tail end of the studio.
Correct.
Yeah.
When it became apparent that I had zero interest in the upright, and my parents, who never really pursued music as their career, all the musicians they knew that tried to make a living at this were broke.
Right, of course.
And like giving lessons out of their apartments, right? And they didn't want that for me. They were concerned that they wanted me to be able to make a living, and he ought to learn the upright. And I was not interested in the upright. That I never fell in love with that instrument. Even years later, when I got one, and I love Mingus. There's a guy named Francois Moutin who played. I saw him play with Joe Locke. I just never fell in love with that. As much as I love it and I love to listen to it and
Right.
I enjoy playing it, but
It's a different instrument.
hauling it around in the street and up and down steps, and I realized I don't love this thing enough to put up with this nonsense. And when you got guys like Omer Adival and Dwayne Burno and guys like this who, what do you need me diluting the gene pool for? Let me stick to what I'm good at.
Right.
Okay, but so, I was like, absolutely not. I'm playing electric, So what are we going to do with him? Well, and JD at the time taught at Manhattan School.
Okay.
And he knew Anthony. And he knew that Anthony was teaching. He says, "I'm going to connect him with Anthony Jackson." Now, I barely knew who Anthony was. I had seen an article in Guitar Player magazine. It was either guitar player or bass player.
Well, bass player didn't come around till the mid-'80s, I don't
Okay,
think.
then it was one of those, and I believe our friend Chris Gisi
Yes.
wrote this. It was like a bass roundtable with Anthony, Will, Mark Egan, and Neil Jason. I
Okay.
think it was like a New York studio roundtable thing.
Probably one of the first issues.
That
Yeah.
probably is, with
And-
Will and his flowered shirt.
And I knew Will, right? And I didn't know who the other guys were at all. And so here's this picture of Anthony with the six string, and I was like, "Who the fuck is that?" And it was only later that I realized that it was him on "For the Love of Money" and "Slip Sliding Away," all that Paul Simon stuff that he did. So when my parents said, "So listen, DeCioccio's going to connect you with this guy Anthony Jackson," I'm like, "Oh, I know him from the Guitar Player article." And from his picture, I thought this is going to be a rough, tough dude. And I get on the phone with him. He said, "Well, I live on Amsterdam Avenue and 90th Street, so you'll come upstairs." And I'm like, "This is, you know." So I show up, and I was early, which he was impressed with, and I spent a long time tuning, which he was also impressed with. He says, "I like the fact that you took so much time to tune your instrument." I'm like, "Okay." And we talked a little bit. We basically talked for like an hour.
Wow.
And he relayed some of the anti-electric prejudice that he had experienced in the studios. And I felt like, well, here's a pro guy. He's been on records. There's an article in Guitar Player magazine about this guy. So as far as I was concerned, he was famous. You see a guy in print and then meet him in person, it's like stepping through the looking glass, right? And the fact that he had gone through what I was going through.
Right, in your youth. Yeah.
It's hard enough being 16, no matter what you're doing. You don't need Wynton Marsalis telling you, right? It's not a great confidence builder, not to sully Wynton, because I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as a musician and an educator, but at the time I could have done without it. But in any case, Anthony, to have this guy sitting across the table, when you walk into a room full of musicians, you hold your head up high. And I mean high. I'll never forget that exchange as long as I live. And I floated home. I was like, yes, okay, now I'm valid, I'm a musician. I got this guy telling me, he says, don't let them, and Paul McCartney and Jack Cassidy and all the James Jamerson. I didn't know Jamerson yet, but I knew that he was the first guy to kind of let me know our instrument has a history that's as valid as any. It's like, all right, great. The following week, he puts a Roland Vasquez chart in front of me called Kifaru. That fucking song is my white whale, because I couldn't read. My reading chops were really dodgy, and now they're okay. But I just froze, because it was all this dang, dang, bang, all these like dotted eighths and a lot of squiggly lines, man. And I just, in those days in the big band at LaGuardia, I would take the charts home and learn everything like one bar at a time. We did a Bob Mincer tune called Latin Dance that was like, there was like a shout chorus with the whole band playing this figure in bum, ba-ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum. And like the first time through, the band is like nailing it, and I'm like, I mean, it was like Carrie, they're all gonna laugh at you, they're all gonna laugh at you. And, and I took the music home, learned the damn shout chorus one bar at a time, and memorized it.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So, but there was no chance of me doing that with Anthony, the guy who played on this record, going, let's try it again. 2, 3, 4. And it was like a disaster. And then he took my bass, my PV Fury, that I got when I was 13, and it was like 3 years later. The bass had never had a setup.
Oh my God.
I changed my strings when they broke. I mean, I was a real like scruffy kid. I didn't know anything about like adjusting the action or this or that. And I'll never forget this. He takes the PV and goes, just with his left hand, he goes, oh, this is preposterous. And my heart just sank. From a week earlier, being like, yeah, space guitar! And now it's like, yeah, kid, you've got a long way to go. And so he was like, he was really only prepared to teach, I think, on a much higher level, that he was not ready for. There was a lot of basic stuff that I still needed, because at that point I was really only self-taught. I had a couple of private teachers, and a lot of them were like upright players who were like doing me a favor.
Right.
So I studied with his roommate for a while, a guy named J.J. McGeehan.
Okay.
Great guitar player, and he was the one that kind of got my ass in gear with some technique stuff and getting me on a schedule of practicing.
But Berkeley's when you become a musician.
Berkeley is when I became that's when I really fell in love with being a bass player.
Great music town.
Great music
A lot
town.
of work in Boston.
And well, the bass faculty at Berkeley, how do I say this without sounding rude? Those guys were teaching because they love to teach. We all know what it's like to have a teacher that's teaching because they need the bread.
Money, right,
Okay, these guys were all like, somebody asked Danny Morris, who I'll, Danny Moe is the guy. Like you have like your handful of teachers that go, that put you on the track. Danny Moe was the guy. I signed up sophomore year. I signed up for a class called Contemporary Electric Bass Styles with Daniel Morris. And I go, oh, that sounds important. I should do that. And I'm sitting in this room where they do the art history classes. It's like these plastic chairs bolted into the floor. And this guy comes in, he goes, all right, guys, holds up a cassette, Jerry Jamot. Puts the tape in, and we would just sit and listen to Jerry Jamot, David Hood, Bernard Odom. Check out what he's doing. Check out like when he goes to the third, like an eighth note sooner than the downbeat of the. See, hear how that pushes the thing? It was like a survey class.
Right.
What I found out later to be called a survey class. And for like 2 hours every Monday, it was like, yeah, I can do that, and I can do it really well. And then Danny's enthusiasm was infectious. At the end of the class, you had to get up and do a presentation on who your guy is.
Right.
And I did McCartney. By this point, I had a Rickenbacker.
Okay. Oh.
And I was demonstrating a few of the McCartney lines that I had been shedding in my room all those years. And he was just as psyched to be learning off of me, which really, again, gave me a lot of self-confidence, gave me a lot of validation. I remember running into him in the hallway a couple of days later. He says, John. I'm like, what? He goes, working on something. I'll get back to you.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like,
You made an impression.
yeah. To make an impression on one of the teachers, not only did it make me feel so...
Best teachers learn from their students.
Correct. And it also taught me, without realizing it, that the learning never stops.
Yes.
And the best part was, this past summer, my daughter, who's 10, went to sleepaway camp in Massachusetts. So we drove up to Boston, spent a night at my sister's place, and I had a day off in Boston. And I messaged Danny on Facebook. I said, I'm going to be in Boston. I should come say hi, blah, 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 blah. So I'm showing my daughter, this is where Daddy went to school. We're walking around like the campus at Berkeley, which is now like, Berkeley is sort of like NYU. They're like the monster that like buys every piece of real estate for like 10 miles around. And we wander into the building, and I kind of I somehow get past the guard, and I'm in the office of the bass department, which is now on the ground floor. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And Danny just appears. Hey, man. I'm like, oh. And we had this great reunion. I hadn't seen him in like 10 years or something like that. And he has not aged a day. He's like, I'm following all your stuff online. Oh, it's so great. He's still like very supportive of everything that we're all doing. And it was just really sweet to have that little reunion and see him.
You can catch additional episodes and much more by visiting us on the web at knowyourbassplayer.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time here on Know Your Bass Player.